Using a proprietary formulation technology platform called Arestat, the biopharmaceutical company Arecor is working with big biopharmas to deliver enhanced reformulations of their therapies. In essence, taking approved medicines and making them better. Its portfolio of products leads with diabetes, where its clinical stage ultra-fast acting insulin candidates AT247 and AT278 are seeking to change the treatment paradigm in an indication that hasn't seen much treatment paradigm change in a long, long time. Arecor's CEO and my guest on today's show is Dr. Sarah Howell, who brought drug development experience from big pharma, including GSK, UCB Pharma, and BTG, along with her when she joined the company in 2011. Dr. Howell, welcome to the Business of Biotech.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you. So I want to get started with some background on you and the company before we get into what's going on today. You joined the company quite a while ago. I think it's been like 11 years, I think, since have you been there? 11 years. Yeah. And you joined as COO, and then a little while later, not too far later, not too long later, but a little while later, you assumed the CEO role. We'll get into that transition. But tell us a little bit about the company when you joined it. It was young. It was a young company, just founded a couple of years prior, I think.
Yeah, that's right. So Arecor was founded back in 2007. Actually, it was an interesting journey in itself. It was originally a spin out of Unilever and into a company called Insense, and they were developing a wound dressing for diabetic leg ulcers, actually. And the chief scientific officer, now Jan Jezik, at the time, was a fairly young, wouldn't mind me saying that, I hope, scientist at that time, and really set about trying to solve a problem in that these wound dressings are used in the field by nurses, but they weren't stable at room temperature. So that caused a problem with the treatment and use of these wound dressings. So that was a problem that Jan solved there, perhaps in some unconventional ways at that time. And then Arecor was really spun out on a question: is this a one-off, or could this be a technology or approach that could be more broadly used across a range of therapeutic products? So, between that time, 2007, and when I joined in 2011, it was really very much research focused, looking at exploring and developing these approaches and this formulation technology. So when I joined, it was a fairly young company and very science driven, as you would expect, and really trying to explore the capabilities of the technology. And without, at that time, really those plans in place how to further develop or commercialize the technology, essentially. So that's the company I joined, but to a certain extent, what attracted me to the company, really, there was a real opportunity there to take this technology further and develop improved products using it.
Mm-hmm. What was the what did the company look like from a personnel standpoint? So I understand, it had some big backing spinning out of Unilever, but did it look and act at the time like a startup? I mean, was it skeleton crew kind of scrapping to make things happen?
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's, at that size of company as well, you've got, everybody doing a bit of everything, essentially. So, less defined roles in that way, and much more academic probably in its look and feel to, looking into the science, not being too constrained by boundaries. And, and that's right at that phase of a company's development. But of course, you then need to prioritize and pick where you're going to focus your efforts and make sure you have the right skills and expertise to grow. So that was really the point at which I joined. So, there was a lot of very talented, hungry, motivated scientists. And I think, it's really then around channeling that into the right direction. So everyone's pushing in the same direction and going after the same goal, essentially.
Yeah. Was diabetes at the core of the vision, diabetes care at that time as well, or was that sort of TBD at that point?
Yeah, not at all, actually. So it was very much, at the point, when I joined, and part of the reason for joining is that, I did my due diligence and thought, actually, there's really something here. This technology could be quite special. but, I've never heard of it, and wondering why, given my background in large pharma as well, hadn't heard of this company or the technology before. And I think that was clear then. It was around identifying where the technology could really be used to its most benefit to improve products, and what patient populations do you have in mind. And even at that point, when I joined, I didn't have in mind diabetes. Then it was really, coming in, understanding the sweet spots really, and where it worked best. And it was only really when I took over, as you mentioned earlier, as CEO in 2015, it was that point that we were making the decisions to pivot and start to develop some of our own products ourselves. So up until that point, it was very much partnership with pharmaceutical companies on their products, enhancing and improving their products, but no internal product development at Arecor ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you just mentioned, I mentioned from the outset that you worked at GSK and UCB and BTG. Those are some big companies. And you did have, you had roles like head of CMC, vice president of technical development, I believe. So comfortable roles with comfortable companies. What was the, I guess, motivation for you personally to decide to, walk away from big pharma and I don't know, take a gamble, maybe take on some risk with an emerging company?
Yeah, and I think that's the case. I mean, in a sense, it wasn't as huge a step as it looks. So I started at GSK, obviously an enormous and successful pharmaceutical company. Great place to start your career. It was my first role there, and to really start to learn your trade and learn how the pharmaceutical industry itself, works. I mean, I was quite fortunate there. I was working on some antiviral products, HIV products, and I was put on a program at the time. GSK had committed to an access to medicines program. So that was really providing their antiviral and HIV medicines at cost to developing countries. So I was put on this program as a sole chemist at that point. I was a Ph.D. chemist to look at, could I improve the manufacturing process? Could I make it more efficient there? So to reduce the cost base, essentially. And it actually worked. So I ended up in this very fortunate position. It was complete luck, really, to a certain extent, where I was the expert then on this program and this process. So whereas in a large pharma company,
I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit there, Dr. Howell. Complete luck. I don't believe that, but I'm sorry to interrupt. Go on.
But there's always an element of luck. So skill and luck, I think, a combination of the two. And it meant that I got to follow that all the way through to being an expert witness with the FDA and all the way through to approval, which ordinarily in a large pharma company, of course, there's departments full of people and experts that go and take over, and you hand it over and it goes through the journey and you start on the next program. So it was quite fortunate that I was the only, chemist and only expert on this process. So I got to see that going all the way through, and that gave me a bit of the bug, to be honest, of actually I quite like having this broader experience base and being able to work on a broader range of programs and really learn as well myself. So after that, product was approved and it's still used today. And that process I developed is still used commercially today to manufacture that drug for patients. I decided to leave GSK actually because, going back to what should have been my day job, at that point, I thought actually I've had a taste of something broader. So I joined Celtech, who were a chemistry and a biologics company, again, developing a broad range of therapies. And they were acquired then by a larger company, UCB. So we became a mid-sized pharma. But that, gave me the opportunity again to work on a product that ultimately it was approved for rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's, and went through that whole process again. So again, been fortunate through my career to see a number of drugs that I've worked on make it to market. I mean, many people work 30, 40 years in this industry and unfortunately never see one of their medicines make it to market. So, at that time, again, it was a huge amount of work, huge experience and expertise getting this product to market. And then an opportunity came up at BTG, who at that time were a 70-person company and really looking to become a fully integrated specialty pharma company. So it was a real opportunity for me to join a smaller company in a bigger role, obviously bring the experience that I had from GSK and UCB Celltech to the table there, and really kind of hone my leadership skills. Mm-hmm. And BTG grew very much by M&A. So we acquired 3 companies whilst I was there, and I was part of the M&A leadership team. So that's where I cut more of my commercial teeth, I guess. So it gave me a unique blend of skills there from, pharmaceutical product development and the science behind that, but also, commercial deal making essentially through M&A and in-licensing products. So, so that I love the science. I'm a scientist at heart, but actually bringing those products through development into market takes, a significant amount of business and commercial acumen as well. So it's really that blend that when the opportunity at Arecor arose, I thought, actually, this is a company that's got great technology, some great science, but needs some guidance now on how to further develop and commercialize it. So that's, really was a good opportunity that fitted well at that time with my kind of experience and skill set.
Yeah, that's very cool. So when you took that COO role, to your point, you had developed some chops around, obviously development was in your wheelhouse from the outset, but then commercialization and kind of moving the ball downfield. But the COO role, I'm sure, brought with it some elements of the job that maybe, in your more development and project specific work, you hadn't necessarily seen. So tell us a little bit about that. So like if you were going to share with, someone who is on a similar career path or someone who was in a development or very CMC specific role and kind of wanted to work into that chief operating officer position, what do you look out for? Like, what have you learned? What did you encounter in your first role as CEO that perhaps, wasn't in the 10 ring or in the wheelhouse of what you had been doing for so long?
Yeah, I mean, I think there in those roles, you've obviously got to make sure you're leading and that you're delivering to a certain extent through others and not, looking to take hold of everything and do everything yourself, because it's important if you want to grow a company, of course, that you have a strong team around you and, you support them and give them the tools that they need to deliver as well. Otherwise, you become the bottleneck, clearly. So that's an important transition to make, and not an easy one to make, actually, when you're used to, managing yourself and your own energy and time and delivering and being accountable for that delivery. Then making sure that happens through other people is a different skill set, and you have to be careful there that you don't keep diving into the detail and disrupting to a certain extent that delivery and that ecosystem. I think the thing that I've probably learned the most that I didn't realize you needed to be a CEO actually is that, and something I didn't realize that, I was inherently within me, is your attitude to risk. I think you've got to have a healthy attitude to risk. That doesn't mean that you're totally reckless and, taking risks everywhere. But also, you have got to take some risks to succeed and to grow. And I think you've got to be comfortable with that, because quite frankly, if you're not, you'd never sleep at night, I think, as a CEO, if you worried about, every decision that you've made where you don't have all of the information. And I think partly, that attitude to risk and perhaps being comfortable with it grows with experience and expertise, because then you are drawing more on your past experiences and you can then make decisions a little bit more on gut feel than you would have done early in your career. But I think if you are a real warrior and you are very risk averse, I don't think the CEO role would be a good fit. And that's just something I'd never heard anyone really speak about, and I didn't realize was so critical to survival, I think, as a CEO. Yeah.
In 2015, you transitioned to CEO at Arecor. So 4 years in the COO spot, and then you transitioned to CEO. Tell us that story. How did that come to pass?
Yeah, and that really was around this pivot for the company and to really move towards. So up until that point, we'd been further developing the technology. There was certainly a development phase of developing this Arestat technology, we call it. So it's a formulation platform to partnering and building relationships with pharmaceutical companies and really starting to have a baseline of our technology licensing model and, working out the value of the technology and the value that's attributed to it to pharmaceutical companies, essentially. So there was a huge amount of change in that time. But then I think, for me, we'd got to a stage where we could routinely deliver enhanced versions of our partners' products. And these are some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world that we were working with and still working with today. So it really was a question of, okay, so we know we can do this. We know that the technology can do this. Why don't we select some products where there's a real patient need and there's a good fit with the technology and start developing some of these products ourselves, which of course means that we can take them, control them in a sense and take them to patients, take them closer to market. And of course, as a company, then retain more of the value and build value into the business. And of course, with my background in pharmaceutical product development, really, that was a perfect time and fit for me to take over as CEO. I mean, in reality, it would have been a little bit earlier, but I had twins in 2013. So about halfway through that time between COO and CEO, I was out of the business for a while.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that. That's cool. That's a good, a lot to juggle, but very cool. I'm going to bounce around a little bit here because I have some perhaps naive questions about the actual business model, right? That Arecor is in. So I'm going to ask them, even though they may be maybe naive questions. I'm going to ask them anyway, because I want to get a sense for how you go about doing deals and choosing therapeutics that you're going to put in the Arestat platform and enhance. To put it very simply, I'm sure. So, let's say I make a widget, right? Like I run Pillar's widget company. And along comes a company that says, your widget's pretty cool, but it could be cooler. We'd like to make it cooler. And my, maybe my initial reaction is a little bit defensive or bristling. Like, what do you mean? You know what I mean? Like, what sort of risk am I going to give up if I give you the authority to make my widget cooler? Again, this is naive and I'm oversimplifying it, but kind of start at that point and walk me through sort of the business philosophy at Arecor around, its platform and what it intends to do to make existing treatments better, to enhance them.
Yeah, exactly. I'll probably split it into two halves, actually. So we have our technology partnerships where we're partnering with leading pharmaceutical and biotech companies on their proprietary products. So they're either in development or on the market. And then we have our own selection process, if you like, and product development and products that we're taking forward. The first wave of those being in the diabetes space. So perhaps starting with the technology partnerships there. I mean, the first is that we're completely agnostic then to therapeutic area. It doesn't matter what indication or that medicine is being developed for. Really, it's about how's this product going to be used by the patient or the healthcare provider, and is it currently in a format that is ideal? Is it the ideal fit for that patient population? So, for example, there might be a product that is in development by that pharmaceutical company, which needs to be delivered via a long intravenous administration within the hospital setting. And they may come to us and say, look, we would like this to be self-injected by the patient at home. But currently, because of some challenges with being able to develop that format of this product, it's a large volume dilute solution. So it has to be via IV, which is pushing that patient into the hospital setting. And, we see that in everyday life now. And for all of us individually, we want to stay out of hospital as much as we can. So, that's where we can use the Arestat technology to develop a very highly concentrated but stable product that can be then delivered via a single injection, via a syringe, by the patient themselves and bring them out of the hospital setting. Now, that pharma company only comes to us once they've tried to develop that themselves, of course. I mean, we're a technology licensing model. So for those types of partnerships, our model tends to be milestone and royalty bearing, so it's revenue generating. And of course, you only want to give up royalties on your products if it's really bringing value to the table. So that's the key here, is that the Arestat technology can develop these enhanced versions of products that are otherwise unachievable. And that would be one example, say an IV administration to subcutaneous self-administration at home. And then, to give a different example, if we go to our diabetes products here, we selected diabetes as a therapeutic area because there's still a huge patient need for that patient population. There's 537 million people now unbelievably living with diabetes, and their daily challenge is to try and control their blood glucose within a healthy range. And we identified this as a key area for us because it was clear that there was still a need for better insulin. So for people with diabetes, if they need insulin, they'll inject insulin around meal times, for example, to bring their blood glucose back into a healthy target range. And there was still a need for much faster acting insulins to help them better manage their blood glucose and outcomes. And this was something on paper. And, at this stage, this is about, innovation then and science, that we felt that our technology would be a good fit here, and we could use it to develop much faster acting insulins. So, those were the first products that we started working on. And now we have clinical data proving that we have these superior, faster acting insulins, even against the gold standard insulins that are on the market today, that have been developed by some of the largest pharma companies in the world. So it very much starts with, what's the patient need? What would improve this treatment and outcomes for patients? And then tracking back, can it be delivered using the technology? In theory, then of course, it's actually doing the science in the labs here at Arecor and conducting the clinical studies to prove it.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna put insulin on a shelf for a minute, because I want to get back to that and talk a little bit about that. But sticking with the platform itself, to the degree that you can disclose, right? Because it occurs to me as I'm listening to you talk that there must be some pretty significant intellectual property. And I figured that my original question was pretty naive, the way that I posed it, like, hey, we want to make your widget better. It sounds to me like there are companies coming to Arecor to say, look, we need some help with our formulation, because we want to make this more patient centric. We want to work on administration, and you have the technology to perhaps do that. And we don't. We meaning in many cases big pharma. So that sounds to me like a pretty good place to be from a platform and intellectual property standpoint. So again, to the degree that you can sort of disclose for us what that platform looks like, how it works. And again, I'm not a scientist. This is the business of biotech. So we want to stay focused on the business angle, but explain some of that science if you can.
Yeah, sure. And you're right. It is a technology platform that's very heavily IP protected there. We've got 33 patent families. We've got more than 50 granted patents in the major territories like the US and Europe. And essentially, so when we're working on a product, whether it's a medicine, whether it's one of our own or one of our pharma partners, the first thing we do is to define, what's the target product profile? What enhancements of properties are we looking to achieve? And once we've defined that, either ourselves or with our partner, we then use our internal expertise in this area to say, okay, what challenges do we need to overcome? What's preventing, this enhanced profile being achieved today? And once we've identified those challenges, we then select effectively tools from our Arestat technology platform. And each tool is a very specific combination of ingredients or excipients that when we combine them with a therapeutic product, we know that they'll enhance a particular property. Now, these are quite complex products and complex medicines, so there's always more than one challenge that you need to overcome. And that's where we'll then select the tools from our platform, each of those being a very specific combination of ingredients that will overcome each challenge. So we might pick 3 tools, for example, say tool 1, 3, and 5. We combine these together in our labs with the product itself and we test it. We're then looking at when we combine these different ingredients with this therapeutic medicine, do we see broadly the enhancement of properties that we'd expect to see? And then once we know we're in the right design space, we have a computational algorithm that we've developed at Arecor that allows us to fine tune and essentially select the exact ratios of all these ingredients. And that when combined together with the medicine itself will give us the most superior enhancement of properties. And it's really using this approach, which is very transferable and scalable, that we can routinely deliver enhanced versions of products that are otherwise unachievable. And each one of these tools, so each one of these combinations of excipients is patent protected as well, which of course drives our technology licensing business model.
Mm-hmm. Okay. To what degree do you, on a day-to-day basis, lean into your development background and maybe, roll your sleeves up and get involved in some of this problem solving that you're just describing? Which elements of the platform we need to bring together to work on this specific formulation? Like you said, I think your degree's in organic chemistry. You started out as a scientist. You spent a lot of time working on developability and development of products. So do you find yourself kind of drifting back into those roots frequently, or do you kind of try to stay rooted firmly in the CEO's office?
Yeah, probably a bit of a combination, to be honest. I think where I do get involved is when we're looking at, okay, what's the patient need here? What ultimately are we striving to achieve and why? Because it's important then, it's not just from you've got to understand what the patient's need is, what data would we need to develop to demonstrate that we're meeting that patient need, which, that takes quite a lot of pharma experience. And we've got depth of experience across the company in that area, but also it's got to be commercially viable. And that's important, not just from, our shareholders' perspective in growing the business. It's really important for the patients as well, because if it's not commercially viable, ultimately that enhanced version of the product is not going to make it to market. So it's really important that you combine that assessment, both of the patient need, what it's going to take to develop it and what that's going to cost. And ultimately, once it gets to market, who's going to pay for it? Because, somebody ultimately, whether it be healthcare systems, insurers in the US, or, some self-pay or co-pay from patients, how does that all work? And can you bring then ultimately a product to market that gets to patients and give them those improvements? So it's a real combination still of commercial and science there. When it comes to actually designing these formulations using the Arestat technology platform, I leave that to the real experts in the company, which is not me.
When you're striving to excel in a new arena, the best guides are the ones already doing it well. The Business of Biotech brings those voices forward to help new and emerging biopharmas turn their innovations, like mRNA and cell and gene therapies, into clinical realities. Tune in and subscribe for insights on hiring, regulatory, and other need-to-know topics for biopharma leaders. The podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. Do you, the commercial aspects that you just mentioned, who's going to pay, what's that going to look like? What's the I guess, formula for getting this thing out to market and to whatever degree possible, comfortably in the hands of patients who need them and affordably. Do you embrace that? Oh, I mean, obviously it's an important challenge for the business, and whether you naturally embrace it or not, I understand that you're going to, but coming from a science background, has that been a difficult adjustment for you, or is it an exciting one? I mean, what's sort of your mindset there?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you approach these with a scientific mindset, which is basically a problem-solving mindset, really, it's the same. It's the same approach. And, it's quite fascinating. I guess that's one way of putting it. There's some interesting nuances on pricing and reimbursement there. And it is critical. And I think ultimately, and we talk about this within the company, it might not be everybody's natural place they want to be talking about pricing reimbursement or what's their business case. But it's, we need to do that, because if we want to see, which is really the purpose of Arecor, is to bring medicines to market that can transform their outcomes. If you want to really make that happen, it's got to be affordable, for whoever's paying that, it's got to be affordable. And I think, that's you've got to not fall into that trap of thinking that just regulatory approval or FDA approval, so the Food and Drug Administration in the US, is the end of the journey, because it isn't. You can gain approval and still find that your product doesn't make it to a broad set of patients, because ultimately, you haven't got that business side right around the pricing and reimbursement. So they all have to come together essentially for it to be a product that makes it into the patient's hands at the end of the day. So, and for me, it's again, I like that mix of commercial and science. So, you see it as a challenge and opportunity, I think, is how you've got to look at it.
Yeah. Since you just brought up regulatory concerns and the FDA, I'm curious about that. So for Arecor, given where it starts on the development, I guess, continuum, working with perhaps an approved therapy and moving to improve it beyond that. Does that give you a head start on the regulatory front? Like where do you sort of engage regulators, and how does that kind of look compared to perhaps a biopharma company that's producing or developing a drug from scratch?
Yeah, and that's one of the real advantages of Arecor's approach and the Arestat technology. As you said, we're taking existing medicines that are already on the market, such as insulin, and we're using the technology to develop enhanced versions of these. So this means that the safety and effectiveness of these medicines is already known, and most, novel therapeutic products fail in development due to a safety issue or efficacy, so effectiveness. So that risk essentially is taken off the table. And what we're doing and what we're looking to achieve is improved, enhanced versions of these, and proving that they're superior and proving that they enhance outcomes for patients. So when we're looking at designing clinical studies, it's really around demonstrating superiority. So this means that, that development and failure risk is lower than a traditional biotech that's developing a novel medicine. And also we can follow abbreviated development and regulatory pathways to market, which means we can develop them much faster and, obviously quicker to patients and to the market at a lower risk. So ultimately a lower cost as well. And I think that's an important element here, that we can bring enhanced products to market that genuinely improve outcomes to patients, but they can be brought to market in an affordable way, which, allows Arecor as a business, of course, to grow, but allows patients and a broad patient base to access these enhanced therapies.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's bring the insulin and diabetes conversation back on the table real quick. And I'm kind of struggling in my mind right now with how to pose this question up. So, I've had conversations on this podcast in recent months with biologics companies that are exploring new biologic treatments for diabetes, sort of with the intent to break out of the insulin paradigm that we've seen for the past 100 years, right? Like there's got to be something better. We've been treating diabetes with insulin for more than 100 years, and it's remained, virtually unchanged. Now your company is saying, you know what, like on one hand, I get it. Like, well, that's the treatment approach that there is, that we see, that we know there's a market for. Let's go in there and see if we can do it better, versus, let's try to find something altogether different to affect diabetes. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, it's got to be daunting to some degree to say, look, this has been the treatment reality, the standard of care for 100 years, and we're going to go in there and try to make it better. What is the opportunity for, I guess, innovation in insulin treatment for diabetes?
Yeah, and it's a good question. You're right. Insulin itself has been around for 100 years. I mean, that insulin has evolved and developed through to what they call analog insulins that we have on the market today. So, the major pharmaceutical companies like Novo Nordisk, Eli Lilly, and Sanofi, Aventis all have, analog insulins on the market today, and they're much better than those first insulins 100 years ago. But what we do know is that there's still room for innovation in insulin, and there's still very much a need for much faster acting insulin. So, as I touched on earlier, the daily challenge for someone living with diabetes is to try and manage their blood glucose inside this healthy target range. And when we eat foods, our blood glucose rises really rapidly. And for an individual without diabetes, insulin is released from their pancreas in tandem to this, so it's physiologic and maintains your blood glucose within this healthy target range. Now, for people with diabetes, so all type 1 diabetics need to inject insulin to do this, and a proportion of type 2 diabetics that are insulin reliant need to do this. So when they eat a meal, they'll inject insulin to try and control this very swift rise in blood glucose. And the fact is that the current best-in-class insulins available to them today are still not fast enough acting or physiological enough, so not like a healthy person's pancreas, to control this blood glucose quickly enough. So this means on average, a person with diabetes spends about 25% of their time with their blood glucose too high in hyperglycemia, and about 5% of their time with their blood glucose too low in hypoglycemia. And it's this time spent out of range that leads to the really serious disease complications associated with diabetes. So there's a 200% increase in all-cause morbidity, for example, and 70% of people with diabetes die from cardiovascular disease. And this is a direct result of their blood glucose being out of range. So this was really the challenge that we set ourselves at Arecor to say, okay, so if we could make insulin much faster acting post-injection, so we accelerate its absorption and improve its glucose lowering profile, we can help these patients better manage their blood glucose and stay inside this healthy range, of course, reducing their disease complications and helping them to stay healthier for longer and keeping them out of that hospital setting. So that was really the challenge for us, and that room for innovation, even with an insulin that's been around essentially. The idea of insulin's been around for 100 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. That's fascinating. Spend more time in the safe zone and avoid some of those other complications. What I haven't looked at it lately, so I'm curious what the what the market forecast looks like. I mean, I think last I read, diabetes is not going away. In fact, particularly here in the United States, I think the forecast is that there will be, I don't know how to put it, like more diabetics to come, right? Like, I mean, it's not an indication that's waning. What does it look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, so worldwide, there's around 537 million people currently living with diabetes. And as you said, that number is increasing. So for type 1 diabetes, it's around 10% of people with diabetes have type 1 diabetes. So it's, it's not related to lifestyle at all. And they need insulin from point of diagnosis there to manage their disease. And then the remaining around 90% is type 2 diabetes. And, that's very much, reaching pandemic levels now. I mean, I think it's fair to say it already is there. And, partly goes hand in hand with the obesity pandemic. We ran a KOL, so a key opinion leader webinar last week, actually talking about our concentrated rapid acting insulin 8278. And one of the clinicians and diabetologists on that call talked around in the US it's expected that around 50% of people in America, so Americans, will be obese by 2030. And that really is going hand in hand and driving up those numbers of people with type 2 diabetes and driving up their need for insulin as well. So, sadly, it's a perfect storm there, essentially. We're seeing an increase in the obesity pandemic, which is in turn an increase in type 2 diabetes. But not only type 2 diabetes, it's increasing their daily insulin needs that they require to manage that disease. So, sadly, we're only seeing that to go one way. And I think the International Diabetes Federation, published these numbers at the end of 2021 there, and they talk about diabetes now being in crisis, just in terms of sheer numbers, but they also calculate that it's just under $1 trillion to treat diabetes and its complications worldwide currently. So there really is this need to help patients improve their outcomes, of course, improve their quality of life, but really decrease the burden both on patients and healthcare systems there. And better insulins have a role to play there, a significant role to play.
Yeah. What's give us a sense for your clinical and regulatory timeline at this point? So as you're talking about this unmet need, the growing unmet need, I'm thinking like, where's Arecor in parallel with all that and its ability to step in at some point beyond the clinic and have an impact? So I guess just give us sort of where you are in the continuum, a pipeline update, if you will.
Yeah, sure. So we have 2 insulins in development. So the first is a product called AT247, and this is an ultra rapid acting insulin, so very fast acting. We see this bringing the most benefit for people with type 1 diabetes, and particularly those that are looking to use that next generation in technology. So it has the potential to enable something called the artificial pancreas, which is a system where your insulin needs are measured via a sensor. It's fed to an algorithm which calculates how much insulin you need, and it's automatically delivered by the insulin pump. And these systems really help those people with type 1 diabetes really closely and precisely manage their blood glucose, but they need faster acting insulins to realize the full benefits and to realize a full closed loop artificial pancreas. So for that product, we've completed our first phase 1 clinical study, and we demonstrated that it was much faster acting and superior glucose lowering compared to the gold standard insulins on the market today. And that was in type 1 diabetic patients. And we're currently in the middle of a insulin pump study, because again, we see the most benefit type 1s using an insulin pump. And we're in the middle of a study there looking at AT247, again, against the gold standard insulins on the market today when delivered continuously via an insulin pump. So that will be key data for that product. If we can demonstrate again that superiority, we can show that we've got an improved insulin that can really help people with diabetes better manage their condition there. Mm-hmm. And then our second product is a product called AT278. Sorry, the names aren't very catchy. Might have to think of some different names that are not numbers for them soon. And this is part
of the fun of moving towards commercial is coming up with more catchy names than
exactly. So this is a concentrated rapid acting insulin. So here the challenge is that for people that have high daily needs for insulin, so they need to inject high volumes and high numbers of units of insulin per day. So primarily type 2 diabetics, as we talked about, as we see that increase in the obesity pandemic, we see higher insulin needs. And so currently this patient population have 2 options available for them today. They can use the gold standard insulins that are on the market, which are fast acting, so give them good blood glucose control, but they're only available at lower concentrations, so 100 units per mil, and some are available at 200 units per mil. So we've looked at saying, okay, if we can develop a highly concentrated, so 5 times concentrated insulin, but is also rapid acting, they can, essentially have the best of both worlds here. They can have a lower injection volume, fewer injections per day. So that helps obviously with compliance and the burden of managing the disease, but good blood glucose control, then this would be a much better insulin for that patient population there. And we have to remember that, it's a complex disease. Many of these patients are taking between 7 and 11 different prescriptions per day to manage diabetes and all of its complications. So the more we can reduce that burden, compliance improves and outcome improves as well. Mm-hmm. So there again, we've completed our first phase 1 clinical study. This was in type 1 diabetic patients to demonstrate that we had indeed been able to develop a concentrated but very rapid acting insulin. So despite it being 5 times more concentrated, it was had an equivalent glucose lowering profile to that gold standard insulin available on the market today, which is 5 times less concentrated. So, this has really given us that data to show that we have a market leader position here, the only concentrated and rapid acting insulin that could be available to patients. And we're planning to enter into our next clinical study, which will be in type 2 patient population, because again, we see the most benefit here for this product for those high insulin users. So that's primarily type 2 diabetics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. What's the next the next big step there at Arecor? So you just walked us through the pipeline and clinical progress, but what's on the horizon?
Yeah, I think for us, obviously, for our diabetes and insulin-based products, it's to take them through those phases of clinical development to prove that superiority and the patient benefit. Obviously, in parallel to that as well, mapping out and working with key opinion leaders, payers, etc., to ensure that we generate the data that's needed for that, for reimbursement. And our strategy is to take those products closer to market, to a higher value inflection point prior to partnering, either for late phase or for commercialization. You asked about the market earlier, and these current mealtime insulins, which is the area that we're developing in, the sales for those currently are around $6.4 billion. So we'll be looking to take market share within that existing market, and be doing that with a partner that's commercially set up for sales and marketing in such a large commercial and patient population, essentially. But it's not just about diabetes. We also have a portfolio of products within the specialty hospital space. So this is a space whereby these products, again, are already on the market and in use in the hospital setting, but they're powders that require this complex mixing procedure prior to use. And the challenge with this is that either that this mixing procedure has got to be done at point of care by the nurses, or it's done by an external pharmacy and then shipped to the hospital in a ready-to-use format. So this adds complexity to the system and, of course, cost. But most importantly, it means there's room for errors to be made here, which can lead to dosing errors to patients. So at Arecor, again, we're using Arestat technology to develop stable, liquid, ready-to-go versions of these products, essentially. So it's ready to be used at point of care, which reduces cost, time for treatment, and also eliminates this risk of there being administration errors to the patients. And to a certain extent, we've validated the commercial potential of these products as we've entered into 2 co-development and licensing deals with Hikma Pharmaceuticals, which were 2 products that we started to develop at Arecor, and now with Hikma as our partner. And we'll be looking to take those to market in this specialty hospital space. But we also have a pipeline of earlier stage products that are pre-licensed that we're working at Arecor, and be looking to enter into more Hikma type deals there. So, it's very much around selecting the right products where there's a patient need, a commercial case, and at Arecor for us to develop those through, at a minimum, proof of concept, generating the IP, and for some of those products, as we're doing with the diabetes, taking them into the clinic ourselves. And I think in doing this, we can build a large and sustaining biopharmaceutical company ultimately.
Yeah. Are those the specialty hospital therapeutics that you referenced? I don't think Arecor is publicly stated indications there, and I'm not going to ask you to do that. But are they indications perhaps that are as common and as big a market as diabetes presents?
Yeah, so in those programs, again, to a certain extent, it's as with our technology partners, it's agnostic to therapeutic area and indication, because it's then around taking these products that from powders to ready to go liquids, essentially. So yes, we're working on a broad range of products through to some oncology indications as well there, which are obviously significant in terms of their commercial revenues. And an important point to note, and partly why we can be agnostic in the specialty hospital sector, is because we're not looking to change clinically how these products work post-injection. We can follow an even further abbreviated regulatory and development pathway to market. So we work on the assumption here that limited or no clinical studies will be needed for approval, which means that we can go and look at broader indication basis, because we're not looking at doing very large and significant clinical studies like you would see with a novel therapeutic product.
Yeah. Okay. A couple more questions, and we're running short on time. I'll let you off the hook. From a manufacturing standpoint, would I be correct to assume that you take your technology to a certain point, and then move that beyond Arecor's four walls for manufacturing purposes? Because I mean, you think about an indication like diabetes, as we've ascertained, we could be looking at significant volumes of your ultra rapid acting insulin. So is that outsourced? Is the idea to give that back to the pharmaceutical company where it sort of originated for manufacturing purposes? What's that look like?
Yeah, exactly. So that manufacturing isn't done in-house at Arecor. So we select external contract manufacturing organizations to do that for us. And our approach there is very much that we're selecting those contract manufacturers that have the capability and the expertise to manufacture these products for use in patients for us, and also working out how we scale that through to commercial scale, because I think that provides then optionality that if we were to partner, for example, one of our diabetes products, then our partner may want to take that manufacturing in-house if they have that capability and capacity, or they may want to partner and take up the supply chain that we've developed there. So it's important there that you have that, strategy, and that it's all part of the pharmaceutical product development strategy, essentially, that, you don't disrupt the lead time to get to market for either ourselves or a partner there. And you just need to, ultimately the sponsor and responsible for that product. So you need to have very clear oversight of your outsourced network.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What haven't I asked you that I should have, Dr. Howell?
What haven't you asked me?
What haven't I asked you that I should have? As you're sitting here listening to me stumble around my questions for you and ramble on, there's got to be something you're thinking, man, you should have asked me that. He's
yeah, I mean, I think for Arecor, what we've touched on really is our, the purpose of the company, and why do people work in a pharmaceutical company? I think there's probably easier ways to make a living there. It's not straightforward. You're looking at cutting edge science. There's the commercial risk and the development risk that comes with it. Even with Arecor, we have a lower risk profile, but we've still got to make the right developments and commercial decisions along the way. But I think it's all around, having the end patient in mind here, and what motivates people at Arecor, and certainly motivated me through my career, is that, we've got real opportunity here to improve, patient outcomes and quality of life. And I think if you get that right and you bring these products to market, ultimately you'll grow a, large and successful self-sustaining business as well. And, I've seen that you mentioned earlier some of my past roles, certainly BTG, it went from a 70-person company to being ultimately then acquired. It was a UK-based company acquired by a US company for, I think it's about 4.2 billion in the end. And it's really around that. What are the patient needs? How do we get it to market? What commercially, what does it need to look like from a commercial case? And, I think if you've got a broad enough pipeline, so you're de-risking in that sense as well, it's something that, smaller companies like Arecor can grow and achieve essentially.
Mm-hmm. How big is Arecor? How many employees do you have now?
So we're 50 people now. So, and that's, majority scientists working on applying the Arestat technology, which is we do in-house. Then obviously we've got a group managing the, CMOs and CROs. The clinical studies, of course, are external as well. So we have to manage all of that ecosystem. And then a smaller number of us looking at the business side and finance, etc. as well. But, the majority of Ph.D. scientists, and we're based in Cambridge in the UK. So, we can bring in some of the very best scientists from Oxford, Cambridge, London. So it's a great location for us for talent.
Yeah, I'd love to spend a couple of days shadowing you, unbeknownst to you, because I'm thinking about like the culture there and your leadership style, and it occurs to me that I'd say the majority of the biotech CEOs, emerging biotechs, our Arecor size biotech CEOs, the majority that I interview are probably business people who come from VC, or they come from it, from sort of the CFO MBA background. That would be the majority. A smaller number are scientists turn CEOs like yourself. And I think about it in terms of my own position here. Like my boss did a healthy element of my job, before he became my boss, and that's a blessing and a curse, right? Like I think boy, there are times I wish my boss was like, someone from the management side who didn't really understand why I do what I do or how I do it, just as long as it works. Blessing and a curse though, but I can imagine that if I did shadow you, I'd see a lot of respect there. I mean, there's got to be a lot of respect there because you're not asking folks to, you praised them, right? You lauded their ability, their abilities, but you're not asking them to do anything that you haven't done in previous roles. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think that's key really, because you understand, you understand the challenges within pharmaceutical development as well. And as you said, that's a blessing and a curse. I think sometimes they probably wish I'd stop asking questions as well. But, that's part of really kicking the tires, isn't it, on the strategy and what we're doing here, and understanding, if there is a bump in the road or a delay or something that needs to be solved, that actually, you can bring some intellectual capital to the table to help resolve that, and also understand when really you've got to a point that this is, we've got to the best place. And, and the team have thought that through and got to the right place. And as you said, you've got to trust your team, you've got to have a great team around you and ensure that you don't become the bottleneck on progress, essentially.
Yeah. Well, we're, like I said, we're about out of time here, Dr. Howell, but I want to thank you for, as I said, subjecting yourself to my rambling question set. I've enjoyed it. I've learned a ton, both about Arecor and diabetes care and treatment and where it's going from here. And it's great work you're doing, and I wish you well on the path.
Great. Thank you.
So that's Arecor CEO, Dr. Sarah Howell. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva, which demonstrates its commitment to early stage biopharma companies at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. Check that site out. Check us out at bioprocessonline.com, where I'd be thrilled if you'd subscribe to my newsletter. And if you like sitting in on conversations like these, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on the player of your choice. Leave us a review. And as always, thank you for listening.